Let's do this in chronological order. The main kickoff was Dortmund against Leipzig. A great game of football. I caught this in various trains and taxis making my way to the Waldstadion in Frankfurt. I did catch the full game. It is, I thought, on balance, and we'll get to Bayern Munich and their dominance and the way they've been playing in a moment. Bayern Munich probably the great winner of this match, right? Because both Dortmund and Leipzig end up dropping points. I think on balance, even though I think Leipzig was slightly better, it's a deserved draw. I thought it was a fantastic game to watch. The pace was very high. I think Leipzig look like a very different side now than they did on match day one when they got absolutely smacked around by Bayern Munich. And I thought too that Dortmund looked very much like a top team. The level was really nice. It was great to watch. Stefan, you had a bit more of a convenient standpoint to watch this from home. What were your takeaways from this game?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It felt like a game that, as you said, excuse me, both sides probably deserved a point ultimately. Going into the match, I was kind of expecting probably a more dominant performance from Dortmund, just considering what we've seen in recent weeks. They've done very well in the Champions League. They've done very well in the Bundesliga. They looked very much kind of in control in games, but I think it was quite telling that Leipzig came out of this game, or started this game very strongly. They started it really kind of came racing out the gates, and they put Dortmund under a lot of pressure very quickly, and obviously scored first with, a fantastic goal, very Route 1 goal, really. But you can see that Dortmund perhaps weren't quite ready for that level of kind of intensity from Leipzig, and Dortmund then go back into the game. They score a goal, a nice goal where, Guirassy kind of lays off the ball, and it's a well-worked goal. And at that point, you're kind of thinking, okay, this is maybe Dortmund waking up. They've had a poor start to the game, but taking back control of the match, they're kind of working the ball across the pitch to score, and then they go and score a goal. But then, Leipzig then score a goal almost immediately later, which is very narrowly ruled offside. And I think that probably was a good way of kind of summing up the match, really. It felt like for every attempt Dortmund made to try and control this match, Leipzig showed an ability to kind of, break that press, go Route 1 if need be. And they certainly had the players to kind of cause a lot of problems to Dortmund. And perhaps the first team to really kind of, I think, question Niko Kovac's tactics and his system, really, in two ways, really. The first one that stood out to me was I thought Leipzig actually did a really good job on Dortmund's midfield. So Dortmund obviously play that 3-4-3 system, which means the two midfielders, are really up against it, to be honest with you, especially against modern teams where most teams tend to play a back three. We had, obviously, Felix Metscher there and Marcel Sabitzer, who have both had really good starts this season, but they were up against Ouedraogo, who obviously did very well, Baumgartner, who I thought best game I've seen him play for Leipzig in a long time, and Sival as well, who I thought was also very good. It felt to me like, literally like Leipzig had an extra man in midfield for a lot of this game. It really kind of felt, tactically speaking, that Dortmund struggled to control the match because Leipzig were kind of winning that midfield battle. And, I think, obviously, Kovac tried to make some changes to that over the course of the second half. Julian Brandt came on for Adeyemi, who's a bit more of a kind of attacking midfielder rather than, out and out forward, because the first half, he had Bayer and Adeyemi playing off Guirassy, who are basically two forwards. So it's not as if one of them can fill in as a number 10 or attacking midfielder, but it felt like they were outnumbered in that regard. And it's the first time I've really kind of seen Kovac's 3-4-3 system this season get pulled apart that way. And the other one as well was and I've said this before in the show, where the way that Kovac's Dortmund team set up is that they're very kind of tactical. They've got a very solid kind of back line. They've got a very solid midfield. Even the front line's very kind of practical in the sense that, Maximilian Bayer's there. He's basically there to just run around the pitch all day. He's not there to be this finesse player. He's not, he's not Erling Haaland. He's not Kylian Mbappe. He's Kevin Grosskreutz in a sense. He's there to kind of chase down and harass midfield defenders and offer some sort of ability to pull defenders away for Guirassy and Adeyemi, who are the two kind of guys who are creating chances. when that doesn't quite work out, Kovac has had a lot of success this season with bringing Julian Brandt off the bench, and he kind of does a lot to kind of win games because he's playing against tired defences. He's also still a very good player. But it's still a system that I think that's very reliant on, okay, we're very hard to break down, we're very hard to score against, but we rely on kind of individual talent and one or two or three players to kind of do something special. And I don't mean really in the sense of like no one else is helping. I just mean like that's predominantly where all the goals and assists come from. And it felt like in this game, I thought Giras, I know he got an assist technically, but he missed a great chance in the second half, I think it was. Excuse me. I just had a salami and sauerkraut sandwich at lunch, and it's just sticking up the back of my throat. So apologies for all the coughing. I didn't think Girassi was particularly sharp. I thought Adeyemi wasn't perhaps as productive as he has been, and then Julian Brandt comes on to save the day, and there's only so much he can do. So that aspect of Dortmund's kind of plan didn't quite work out either, I thought. And by the end of the game, Manu, I thought it was actually Leipzig who were in the ascendancy, to be honest with you, and probably could have scored a second goal and won this game. So, yeah, I think a point's a good result for both teams, but I think Dortmund, maybe more so than Leipzig, would have been happier with it because I think Leipzig could have probably quite easily won that game.
Yeah, and maybe should have, right? That is the takeaway from this game, perhaps that that the way that they played and the way that they controlled the match at times, they should have maybe won this game. Of course, it's difficult. Signal Iduna Park, it's a very difficult place to go and be to win games like it. The Romelu goal, just slightly offside, of course. But I really thought it's interesting that Ole Werner, the way. I mentioned this before the game, right? Niko Kovac has never beaten him, and that continues. So he is quite adept in working out at his tactics against him. But just in general, when I looked at this lineup, this is the 4-3-3, and that seems to be his preferred lineup now, and he's very much bought into that. I'd be really, really curious to hear what the conversation was like after that 6-0 defeat on match day 1, right? And when Jurgen Klopp had to go up to Leipzig and sit down with the coaching staff and the players and discuss all of these things. And I'm really curious what the conclusion out of that was, because since then, Ole Werner has very much nailed down that formation, right? That 4-3-3 with the midfielder Baumgart and Seiwald and Ole Werner, who now 2 games in a row he's starting. He's finally showing. I interviewed him last summer when he signed for Leipzig, and then of course he spent the entire season struggling with injuries. And he's finally coming to form, nominated for the U21 national team. So that's really great to see. That front three, Romelu in the middle, flanked by 2 fast wingers, whether it's Nusa or Jan Diomande, who comes on, right, and Bakayoko. And I think what you notice there is that you have the center forward, a number 9, right, which is a clear move away from the double striking system that they had with Czesko and Openda last year. There's a clear number 9 now in the system. Then you have 4 players who press the opponent's defense, right? You have Baumgartner, Ouedraogo, Bakayoko, Nusa in this case. If Diomande plays, then it would be him. Konrad Rada is another player who can do this really well. But these are all players that are fast, they're dynamic, and they're very athletic. And there's a clear handwriting and a clear thought and pattern here that, they looked at the system. They looked at the way that Leipzig played last year, and they said, like, we have to go back to a system where we're a high-pressing team, where we're a hard-working team, where we put pressure on the opponent's defense at all times. From what I've seen over the last few match days, that's been really working, and I think that is a big difference than from what you saw last year or the year before that, even, where you had 3 or 4 attacking players in Openda, Czesko, and Harvey Simmons, but they all were kind of like doing their own thing, right? They weren't playing within a system, and there's a clear handwriting now, and there's a clear identity. When you think about Red Bull football, Ole Werner is very much putting that on the field at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll come on to Bayern and how Frankfurt played against them. And, I know this isn't maybe the best way to describe or promote the league. But I do think sometimes clubs do look at Bayern on the fixture list and just think it's a day off. No one's expected to do anything, so we're going to lose that game. We accept we're going to lose it, and they go into it, accept and lose it. And I wouldn't be surprised if Leipzig did that at the start of this season, because obviously it's so early in Ole Werner's time at his club. He had a whole squad of young players. He still wasn't maybe entirely sure who should be starting, what system, what formation, and that showed on the pitch. But they've come a long way since then. You're absolutely right, and you're right. I think I said after the game, with every passing week, it feels like the RB Leipzig are doing better and better and better. I think you could probably make a decent argument that they obviously benefited from not having a midweek game like Dortmund did, and I think that's something we'll probably talk a lot about this season, in the sense that that's a huge advantage that Leipzig have over the likes of Frankfurt and Leverkusen and Dortmund and Bayern, to most extent as well. And, they look like a far, far fitter team. They look far more energetic than Dortmund in this game. So we have to take all that into account. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how, Ole Werner's reputation changes in Germany this season, Manu, because I still get a lot of Werder Bremen fans in my mentions on social media being like, "Oh, we didn't sack him; he chose to leave," and all this stuff. And I thought, well, yeah, technically, but it was gently nudged out the door by the club, and there were certainly plenty of people in the Werder Bremen stands demanding that he left. Because of the fact that he just refused to play young players, and it was obviously grating. But he got results, and if he does continue to do well at Leipzig, then, we'll be very quickly looking at one of the most exciting young managers in German football.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that a lot of Werder Bremen fans don't have time for him, and he's at a club where the rest of the country hate. So, it might be this kind of weird situation where most German football fans have to begrudgingly accept that Ole Werner might be a decent head coach, despite the clubs that he's played for in the past. You know what? So far, so good. Yeah, aside from that Bayern result, they've done very, very well. So, I guess we'll have to see how far they can go this season.
Also in that Bayern game, there was still Louis Openda, there was still Javi Simmons, right? And you had to play them to keep the market alive for them. It was the most inconvenient of times to play them, right?
Yeah. I mean, you make such a good point, though, about like Openda and Javi Simmons, and even Sesko to an extent as well. Like, we spent the whole summer talking about how Sesko wasn't a finished product, and fine, whatever. He's gone. Best of luck to him in the Premier League. But with Openda and Javi Simmons, two players who absolutely had probably already proved that they were good enough for Leipzig, proved that they were ready to make the next step, and proved that they were waiting for that next step to show up. And you're right, this whole front line with Leipzig is completely changed. Yes, they've still got some old players in there, but you're right, you look at that entire front three, Bakayoko, Romelu and Nusa, there's three players who do have to prove themselves in the Bundesliga, especially Nusa, who obviously didn't get a chance to do that last season. Veth, I think, still has a lot to prove. Odrago is still learning his trade there. Baumgartner, not so much, but I think he just comes across as a very kind of like, he's like Kevin Campbell 2.0, or the way I described him in our subscriber chat as Marcel Sabitzer Jr., in the sense that like he's just a solid pair of hands in the Bundesliga. He's happy to do a shift. Yeah. He's not really angling for a move to Manchester United or Chelsea, is he? So it's a far hungrier Leipzig side, isn't it?
Yeah, and Romelu looks like a far more finished product than even Česko. Maybe not as high of a ceiling, but he just looks like he's far more of a finished product. And yeah, you're right. I mean, like, we'll have to see where this goes. I mean, Dortmund too. We haven't really talked about them yet, but they get a point here. Of course, now they have to win the Spitzenspiel or the Klassiker after the international break to keep Bayern close by. But this is a game that maybe they in the past would have lost, right? And Kovac is so very good at getting the results against games where maybe they're on a bit of a back foot. So wow, it's interesting. Both these clubs are really interesting. I mean, they both still remain in touching distance to Bayern. If Bayern do slip up, if they ever do slip up, that remains to be seen.